X-Men. Get it!
Hey everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of Battle of the Atom. My name is Zach Jenkins. With me as always is Adam Reck. Adam, how you doing tonight?
I am great, and I am really excited because we have some fantastic guests on the show today.
We do. In fact, today we have Eric and Julia Lewald, the people behind X-Men the Animated Series. Eric, Julia, how are you guys doing this evening?
Doing fine. Glad to be here and excited to have the chance to talk with you both.
Yeah, that's awesome. We're real excited to have you guys here. For those of you who don't know, these are the folks behind, they were both large contributors to X-Men the Animated Series back in the 90s, as well as on XMenTAS on Twitter and the blog XMenTAS.com. That is just a beautiful wealth of knowledge and information of what was happening with X-Men at that time, and especially the animated series. So we're real excited to have them on.
Yeah. And just before we get started with questions, I just want to thank both of you for being involved in this. I was 12 years old when the show came out, and it was a huge deal that my favorite characters were somehow magically on my TV screen now. And I think, Zach, I've told you this anecdote that, I went as far as to record the animated theme music onto a cassette and carry that around on a mixtape, listening to that on a regular basis. It was one of my favorite shows. So I'm really grateful that you guys were able to get that up on TV.
Oh, and that is hardcore right there. I love you doing that.
Yeah. So, Zach, do you want to jump in with questions?
Well, right before questions, I did want to give everyone a bit of a just grounding. Eric, Julia, what were you guys' roles with X-Men the Animated Series?
Well, I was in charge of the scripts, of developing the show, in deciding what the stories would be, and then all 76 scripts, either coming up with the stories and supervising the writers. And it just, now the guy, it wasn't called it back then, but now that guy's referred to as the showrunner. So it was basically, I can't draw. There are all sorts of wonderful people like Larry Houston and Will Mineo that were leading the production side and the art side. But I was responsible for all the writing on the show from the day we started till the day we ended.
And I was one of the writers on that show and got to be a fly on the wall for the whole 5-series run because he was handling most of it from our dining room table. This is back in the day when that was done. I had the privilege of writing Days of Future Past Part 1 for Season 1. And then later, Whatever It Takes, with Storm's return to Africa and the appearance of the Shadow King. And then helping out, coming up with stories, breaking out stories, but also specifically Beauty and the Beast is a personal favorite that then went on to our friend Stephanie Matheson to write the script for.
No, that's awesome. I mean, those are all episodes that really stick out. They're in memory. I mean, look, I went back and I rewatched the show probably about a year ago. I finished it up, and it was crazy to me how much of that stuff still resonated with me. How much I remembered from watching it on Saturday morning repeats. So it's cool.
Well, that's great. We really a kind of a difference for us because we both had worked in animation for a while before this, and we'd seen a lot of almost all shows being written for little kids. I mean, we were very conscious of writing it for ourselves and for adults. And so we're really pleased that 25 years later, people can still watch it because, we fall in love with a lot of stuff when we're little, and it's wonderful to look back, but having it last has really been something, we're really proud of because you don't get a chance to do that very often in kids TV. I usually tell you, dumb it down and make it simple. And in this case, the wonderful executives at Fox said, no, man, push the envelope, make it special.
No, that's really cool. And that leads right into our first question on this. So like you guys said, you guys weren't writing this, just for kids. This was a bit more mature. It's a lot different than, say, like a G.I. Joe or a Transformers that was big, right before this. Heck, even a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which I think was the, next big thing right before this was the next big thing. And one of the ways I at least noticed going back is you guys did a ton of serial storytelling. You had season-long arcs. You had multi-part episodes. How did you guys structure that, especially back in the days where TV was you catch it when you catch it, and if you miss it, you better hope you find a rerun?
I'll jump in here with one quick aside that, and I'll let Eric, he's got all the details on this, but as X-Men, the animated series, was being developed, not that it was considered a long shot, but it had never been done successfully before.
There hadn't been a really successful Marvel show before that. They tried it, and so it really, when we got started, everybody thought it was only going to last one season.
So Eric and his friend Mark Edens were sitting around pitching out stories to each other and came up with the original 13, and it was presented to the rest of us as an arc, thinking that if it doesn't go forward, then these are the stories we wanted to tell.
But credit where credit is due. The people in charge of this are it's Fox Television. That's Margaret Lesh, whose baby this was. She'd been trying to get X-Men on TV for almost 10 years, and nobody would put it on because they all thought it would fail. They all thought there wasn't a big enough audience, that it was a bunch of nerds, and it just wouldn't work. When she became a head of Fox Kids, she made sure it was on, and Will Mineo, who she hired as the supervising producer for the first year, Will went to her and said, with my absolute backing, said, look, comic people love comic books. They're told serially. They're told over many, many, many issues. Let's do X-Men like that. How hard can it be? It's just like and they got resistance from everybody, advertisers, affiliate stations. This is crazy. If we preempt something, or if kid misses it, how are they going to catch up? I said, kids are smarter than that. They will be able to see, previously on X-Men, they'll be able to see 10-second recap, and they'll catch up, and they'll know, and they'll follow. And so that was about a 2-week argument. And to Fox's credit, they said, okay, we'll take this risk. And the problem is, it takes like 6-7 months to write and produce an animated show. And they come back from overseas. And what really happened, one of the reasons we started late, was there were production problems. And so if you got episode 1 and 2 and it's serial, if 3 isn't any good, which was the problem one, I think, which had to be redone a bit, you can't show 4 yet because they're in order. So it's a big risk. It's a roll of the dice on the part of the network that you can get them done early enough and have them stockpiled so that you can show them in order. And that's one reason it hadn't been done before, except for maybe Bold, which I love growing up. And really hasn't been done much after, is that it's a challenge for them. They have to start early enough. They have to put enough money in to make sure they have enough shows in order. And we fought for that. And after the first season, because there were production delays, they said, oh, sorry, can't do it. So that's when we kind of cheated and put the Savage Land bits in order. And so we told, quote unquote, standalone episodes for the next 13, but we had this 11 story thing going with Xavier and Magneto, and that was our cheat for that. And then after that, they said, okay, you can't do that. And so we said, okay, well, can we do 4 and 5 parters? And they said, okay. So now we kept on trying to do longer connected stories, because as writers, they're much deeper and they're much more satisfying. And it's something that the industry really doesn't want you to do. And it's a continuing fight.
Well, there is something interesting about how the way the show works is also very similar to the way the comic works. I mean, I've talked to so many people that came into X-Men at a random issue and then got hooked on the continuity aspect because they were confused. So the same could be said about the show as well. You could tune into a random episode, maybe having missed a couple, and then you'd be really desperate to try and catch the reruns somewhere to try and fill in the gaps. I guess I'm curious also, now that you had the green light to say, okay, we're going to do these long form arcs. How was it decided that you guys were going to try and tackle, at least within the context of the characters that you were using, to do a lot of the classic storylines that X-Men fans really love, and maybe wouldn't have expected out of a Saturday morning cartoon?
Well, that was a ongoing discussion between us and Marvel and Fox. Saban was involved. They didn't care creatively. Graz Entertainment was a partner. It was this little kind of patched together garage band kind of production that was thrown together. And the two groups that really cared about the storytelling were the three writers, the executives at Fox, and the people at Marvel, because Marvel obviously wanted to protect their characters. And so what happened was the first couple seasons, the only one that we took that was like directly an adaptation from the books was Days of Future Past. And the reason that we didn't do more directly from the books is that we were just kind of thrown in the deep end saying, guys, you're already 2 months behind, quick, come up with 13 stories. Mm-hmm. And we had a bunch of X-Men fans among the producers and the artists, and we talked to them about the characters. But to tell you the truth, when I started and the head writer who worked for me, Mark Eden, started laying out the first 2 seasons, we really didn't know the X-Men very well. We were just going with X-Men universe reference materials, decide who are the characters, and we just picked stories we thought, we said, okay, what's the thing that would mean most to Rogue? There's always a character decision. And we said, well, maybe she might even give up her mutancy if somebody offered that to her. So we had that episode early on, sure. And what we did was we were trying to respect Marvel. So every chance we got, we'd pick bits and pieces from the books or from the reference materials and say, oh, this person's related to this person. If we ever had a bad guy, we'd always pick from the books. So we kind of created the stories for the characters and then went back and picked bits out of the books to flesh them out. There wasn't really a push the first 2 seasons to develop famous stories from the books. That happened the 3rd season when we did Phoenix Saga and Dark Phoenix Saga. And also writers would bring us stuff. They say, oh, we love this thing with Asteroid M, with Magneto. Okay, great, guys, run with that. Show us how that could be a great 2-part story. So writers were bringing us stuff. Marvel was being supportive, but the only things that they ever suggested to us to adapt were Days of Future Past and the 2 Phoenix Sagas. The rest of it was basically us and the writers and the network brainstorming.
Yeah,
that's such a great insight into the decision-making process, because I've always wondered about that. Zach?
Yeah, well, I guess jumping off that, I think one of the ways that it shows, you're taking characters and not really like welding them into place, but using them where they make sense with the cast you had, was actually in Days of Future Past, where instead of having Kitty Pryde, who, inexplicably doesn't show up in this series,
well, there's a reason. There's a reason.
I'm putting a pin in that real quick because I think we're going to circle back to it. But okay. you have Bishop showing up, and he's known for being a time traveler. He's known for all that stuff coming from a bad future that's very similar to the future of Days of Future Past. So I think that's a very organic way that worked.
It really helped. It really helped having. It was very even-handed. There were folks who, and I'll admit I was one of them, really didn't know the universe of the X-Men. And there were other folks who were complete fanboys. And so there was a kind of, there was a good tension between that. Like we would sometimes get the notes from each other. Oh, so and so would never sound like that. And this, well, in the context of the story, we need this to happen. So between us, we'd all kind of figure out a way to make it work, and that included choosing to bring Bishop in for that particular story.
Yeah, and we also thought, I mean, there were things that were TV oriented, like Bishop, a physical person traveling rather than a kind of someone's soul, like Kitty Pryde's soul traveling back to the previous Kitty Pryde. It just was. There's something about TV animation that's more realistic and linear than comic books can pull stuff like that off. And I think was for the people, because we have to remember the large majority of people watching the show didn't know the books. We were constantly told that, look, make sure you're clear and simple and straightforward and explain things well, because a huge part of our audience is not going to have the books to fall back on. So we tried to make things a little more realistic, like, again, having a real flesh and blood time traveler rather than someone's soul. And also it gave us somebody that it was fun, that could know the old Wolverine in the future. And it opened up a bunch of fun stuff for us, having it be a flesh and blood person.
Well, and it's interesting that I don't know if the reference materials that you guys are working from were mainly from when you're producing the show, but it's always been fascinating to me that in watching the show, it wasn't an adaptation of classic X-Men. It was really also an adaptation of 90s X-Men. So we're getting characters like Bishop and Cable, and there's a variety of different kind of cameos that I would have never expected. And I got to say, being a fan of the books at the time and being a kid, I'm watching this show going, oh my God, did I just see that character in the background of that scene? And that for me was such a wonderful thing. Yeah, random would pop up, or members of X-Force, and you'd be like, wait, really? They're going to go there?
Can you imagine how the internet would blow up today if there was an internet back then, and you could have gone, did you see that? Did you see that?
Boy, tell your listeners, imagine, there was no internet back then. It just had started. But the credit was due for you seeing all these incredible characters. That wouldn't have come out of my mind. That came out of the mind of the lead producer, storyboard supervisor, the guy that was in the trenches for 4 of the 5 years, basically in charge of all the boards and all the production. That's Larry Houston. And he was the one. He was an X-Men encyclopedia. So what happened was we'd send him these scripts, even at outline form. He'd look at it and say, okay, we're at a place that needs half a dozen background mutants. We're not going to put random mutants back in. We're going to put in cool people that the fans will be able to recognize. And one of the interesting twists was most of those people we probably weren't legally allowed to put in.
Yep.
I mean, there's Deadpool.
There's Doctor Strange.
There's all these people that at the time Marvel was on the brink of bankruptcy. They'd given the rights to a bunch of things to all sorts of folks.
Split it all over the place.
And so the first month or two, he would write in things like, Spider-Man is seen in the background, and you get notes saying from lawyers saying, you can't do this. So next time he'd just say, okay, a mutant's wrist is in the background, and a web comes out of it.
Storyboard, there's no color, and that's what goes.
And they all went through. So all those dozens of cameos, probably a third of them were illegal, and all of them came out of the mind of Larry Houston.
That is great.
The artists would sit down and say, who can we put in this scene?
Oh, I love that so much.
Yeah. Now, on talking about that cast of characters that you guys had in there, Pride of the X-Men, which was a failed pilot, came on just a few years before this, and it had a completely different cast. I think, Cyclops, Wolverine, and Professor X are the only ones to really carry over from that. So, with your cast being so different, was the failure of Pride of the X-Men an influence on that, or how did you develop the cast of characters that you did?
When Pride of the X-Men happened, it was a function of coming out of Marvel itself. And this was when Margaret Lesh was working at Marvel, along with Will Mineo and Larry Houston. So those three people were at Marvel trying desperately to get a show that worked.
At a Marvel Productions, at an independent production company here in LA that they produced a bunch of cool shows, but somehow they could never. They're the people that tried for years that could never get a show sold. So Margaret like grabbed some money from another show and made Pride of the X-Men as a pilot. Say, look how wonderful the X-Men can be. And unfortunately, the people making the decisions for Pride of the X-Men, I guess Marvel production people, Marvel, whoever was involved, were not the same people that were involved in making decisions with us. And to our eyes, and also to Will and Larry and Rick Hoberg, who also worked on it, who's one of our main artists, all the people who worked on it looked at it and said, oh my God, there are like 800 characters in this. We've lost the story. Australian Wolverine, what the hell's going on? That was absolutely what you think it was. It was Crocodile Dundee had been popular the year before and made $1 billion. And so whoever was in charge, creative
and it wasn't
in charge,
Margaret. It was not Margaret.
Said, oh, Wolverine has to be Australian. Those were the kind of decisions that were being made. They actually had more money for their animation, and they had just as talented people working on it. It's just the decisions they made just didn't work. So come 92, all these people who cared desperately about that and saw that as a missed opportunity, as a personal failure, all of them were just ready to put their foot down and say, this time we get it right. I don't care what you say. I don't care what toys you're selling or who wants to change this. We're going to do X-Men right this time. And they had that attitude going in. And that was crucial because there were half a dozen times where the show could have been changed.
So these are people who literally would go, went to the wall and put their jobs on the line more than once. And as a result, that's the X-Men animated series we know and love today. Yeah, and
luckily, I and the head writer absolutely agreed with their vision of how the show we wanted. And so you had this unusual, almost never happens in our business, alignment of the stars where the network, the producers, the writers, and the artists all wanted the same show. There still were people involved, again, half a dozen times, that could have derailed it and turned it into something very different. Maybe wanted something a lot cheaper and younger. We got a lot of pressure the first 6 months before the show came out to make it younger and funnier and simpler. What's with all this sophisticated scripts and stuff? You're scaring people. Stop it. And luckily, we fought that. And when the show came out was successful, everybody shut up and we just did the show that we wanted to do. But until it came out and was successful, there's always people involved, and there's a lot of money, so we have to respect and listen to them. There's always people involved that want to change it and make it something different.
I find all this really fascinating because just being a consumer of this stuff at the time, especially after the Jim Lee relaunch of X-Men Volume 2, I almost thought of the animated series as just a natural extension of the insane marketing that was going on at this time. You have comic books that are being sold by, Pizza Hut and candy bar companies, and you could get X-Men themed clothing. It was a wild, weird time that really is not able to be replicated now. But I always kind of assumed that this magic thing came about because, well, we needed to sell Toy Biz action figures. So it delights me to hear that there was like some really amazing teamwork to get this creatively off the ground.
There was, and as someone who got to watch it all kind of come together, and fortunately it was not a function of we've got 1,000 toy deals in place, now let's make the show. This is one of those rare occasions when that is the reverse. The show came first.
Yeah, they actually didn't have the toys ready. I don't know if you remember, but when it first came out, there really wasn't anything on the shelves, and they had to run and catch up. There was other stuff that was supporting the books, like you said, but Avi Arad's Toy Biz had the deal right then, and we did get a call about after we'd finished the first 7 or 8 scripts from Avi. So, can't you put in, the Wolverine phone or the curtains or the pajamas or something? And we just said no. And luckily Fox had negotiated it so we could say no. And there was even it's in the book. There's a story where the head guy, our head guy that fought so many of the battles for us, Will Mineo, who designed the show, basically, he almost lost his job because somebody at Marvel made a deal for like bobblehead toys in Australia. And the deal was, they got the money from Australia for, I guess, McDonald's bobblehead toys, some promotion. And Marvel had promised them that they'd all be featured in the show. And Will just said, no, this is just fire me, but we're not ruining it by putting your stupid product in the middle. What 35-year-old superhero has his own bobblehead, by his sheets, and or picks up a walkie-talkie that has his face on it? It just was, no, we're not doing a toy show. We're doing a character show. You can't live with that. Well, let's renegotiate and we'll all leave. But it came to that. It came to him almost lose his job over it.
I'm still hung up on the Wolverine phone. I wonder if it stabs you when you want to pick it up, or.
I mean, I might have bought one. That would have been good marketing.
Yeah. Well, I want the bobblehead.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's awesome that we've got something that's such a creator, driven thing. It's really cool to hear that happen about the show. Now, you said something earlier, and I'd be remiss if I didn't answer this lifelong question. Why didn't Kitty Pryde show up, at all?
Well, it was, we had the big discussion the first day. There was a huge meeting with everybody, with Haim Saban and Stan Lee and all the Marvel people and all the Fox people and all, 25 of us in a room. And this, who's the cast going to be? And so everybody had various ideas for the cast, and there were 3 or 4 decisions that were made there that just pretty much happened to do with the current Marvel books. One was, we're really interested in Gambit and Cable, so we want to make sure to feature them. They hadn't really been not that much part of the thing before. And we're kind of high on Jubilee. It was Jubilee or Kitty Pryde. It was one or the other. We were going to have one teen girl. And so I guess everybody thought, well, we've got one teen girl. The cast is so huge and unwieldy as it is, we didn't have guest good guys that often, just because it was hard to service 9 or 10 normal good guys. So there weren't that many guests, and we had decided on the other teen girl. And part of it, I think, was everybody was conscious of the failure of the Kitty Pryde pilot. Whether that wouldn't have made any difference to the fans, I don't think, but that was in the back of the producers' minds, I think.
Yeah, from a marketing perspective. I wanted to ask, in terms of, where you think you guys fall in terms of the history of the brand, since the show has been on the air and then aired in many iterations, in lots of reruns. You've had multiple animated series. You've obviously had the movie franchise and all of its spin-offs. Now we've got actual live action X-Men on TV. We've got Legion, which Zach covers on another podcast. We're now getting a Fox live action series in the fall. Where do you guys feel like you fall in terms of being a chapter in that history that maybe led to some of this stuff actually being able to happen?
Julia always calls us the bridge.
I'm chomping at the bit here to get in on this, just because in the history of entertainment, look, it's a kid's cartoon show. We hear that, we get that, we understand. But looking back on it 25 years later, and at the time, it's something that we're all very proud of. But also, I truly believe that it was the way into the X-Men universe. I mean, the whole universe, the comics, everything, for a lot of people when it came out in 92. And then reintroduced people to it as they found the show over the next, several years. And then because of that, I think we wouldn't have the billion-dollar franchises of films. We wouldn't have the TV shows on live action today if it weren't for X-Men the Animated Series. I will stake my claim on that.
Yeah. In writing the book, I was looking back, and you guys can do this kind of research. It's really pretty simple to look at. Superheroes, comic book superheroes, had tried to be part of the larger world culture. Like I love the early 40s Fleischer Superman cartoons. Those were cool. And then there was the Superman live action show in the 50s, which I saw reruns of when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. There was a Batman show in the 60s. But you notice I'm saying there's one. It's like I was looking for, and I was going like decade by decade. You go a whole decade and then maybe be 3 or 4 successful superhero shows over the movies over the course of 10 or 15 years. Like say a couple Batman, a couple Superman or whatever. No Marvel movies, Marvel TV shows that maybe like a lot of the animated ones, they really didn't do very well early on in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where the attempts at them. And then the thing that happened, that, we really absolutely believe after looking back at this, that superheroes were ready to burst out, and that 89, 90, 91, 92, in 89, the Batman movie came out, the Tim Burton movie. That allowed Fox to say, okay, we take a chance on Batman and X-Men. This hasn't really worked before. Super Friends was okay, but there really hasn't been a breakout cartoon. There hasn't been a breakout live action show. There hasn't been a Marvel movie. We'll take a chance on these 2 shows. And we think that we and Batman showed Hollywood that the world could appreciate superheroes in television and movies. And after that, Katie Bar the Door is probably more successful superhero movies this past year than there were on average per decade back, in the last century. It's exploded. And we're serious when we told you when we were coming out, people really were just, this thing. We didn't have contracts past our first year because they just thought it was going to be like the other ones. It'll flame out. And they even resisted making the X-Men movies after the success of this, just because their movie division thought, some little kids will go through it. Margaret Lesh had a hand in talking them into do that as well. Obviously, there's been this immense success, and credit to all the people that did it. But when we were doing it, nobody believed this was going to be successful. Absolutely not. And we really think that we helped make it plausible to people out here in this sometimes dead-headed town to think that the superheroes could be central to the culture. And I really think they've become that.
That's awesome. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. This was one of the big, flag bearers that opened the floodgates for this glut of superhero everything we have today.
Once upon a time, when you look at films, there are genres. There are westerns, there are musicals, and superhero was not a genre until last 15 years. It didn't even exist. And that's, I think, a function of what we just talked about.
Yeah, and it took off, and it wasn't just for kids, and it's very satisfying. Some people are horrified that it's become such a huge part of the movie business, but it just never stops. I mean, every year there are more. I mean, people think, the audiences are going to get tired of it. They've seen this 100 times, and then the newest Marvel movie comes out. Again, credit is due. Those people are amazing at shepherding their characters through these different worlds, and it somehow sticks with people, and I can't explain it, but we try a little in the book.
Grateful to be a part of it.
Yeah,
that's awesome. I know we've kept you a bit, and I just wanted to get one last question in here, one that I think is real relevant to kind of everything you've been saying. So your lead character on the show, I mean, it's an ensemble cast, but come on, the lead character of X-Men is Wolverine, who is a man who's best known for having knives in his hands and stabbing people with them. So how did you deal with standards and practices when you're doing a kid's show about a man who superpower is owning knives?
Slashes people. Believe me, we were really lucky. Again, you're talking about one person can screw up a show. The standards and practices lady at Fox was wonderful. She liked the books. She was serious about storytelling. She'd worked in primetime some, so she wasn't just, focused on little kid stuff. But we started this with like a long list of stuff. Can't kill anybody. We can't see any blood. You can't stab anybody. You can't punch anybody. You can't just be vengeful without immediately showing remorse for it. Long list of stuff that they were used to saying you can't do in a kid's show. And I just sat down. I had longest memos, 5-6 page memos per episode with Avery Coburn is her name. She's wonderful and so thoughtful. And I said, look, I've got to show, if we're going to show Wolverine at some point regretting some of his action, you've got to show his ferocious action. You just have to. And we would find ways around him using his claws, and that was obviously very restrictive. But one of the ways we balance that is that we really try to make it an ensemble piece. When people ask who's your favorite character, we get everybody. Everybody gets listed. Jubilee, Beast, anyone. My favorite character was Xavier, because Xavier it was like he was the dad holding all this family together. And so each of these, we tried not to make it the Wolverine and the X-Men show, even though he's so compelling a character. Len Wein, thank you for this. I mean, who knew? But he's so compelling a character. We had to consciously try to give stuff to other people because he's so easy to write for. He bursts off the screen. And so one way of dealing with his claws is just have stories that don't require him. Oh, the other one Julia's about to jump in on. This is brilliant. Will Minia we had a fight with Marvel over this. The way we were able to integrate Wolverine's claws was Sentinels.
Sentinels.
But broadcast standards will let you rip apart a Sentinel, but not a person. So Marvel really got mad at us at first because we were using the Sentinels as our first villains instead of Magneto, who was their favorite. And we wrote them back and said, guys, you can do all sorts of stuff in the books that we can't. You just don't understand. This is a dynamic thing. If you want Wolverine to have any presence in this show, we have to have things he can rip apart. And it's not going to be Magneto, and it's not going to be people. It's got to be robots. So we're starting with the Sentinels. We're sorry, but it's beyond discussion. We need this. So to answer your question simply, the Sentinels is what will let us use Wolverine.
And also, we're talking about Wolverine now because of the incredible voice talent of actor Cal Dodd, who are Wolverine.
His voice.
He's the voice I hear in my head when I see anything Wolverine related these days. If I read again or something, I hear Cal Dodd.
It's such a brilliant idea to use the Sentinels. I mean, it brings me back to 80s G.I. Joe and how the Cobra foot soldiers all turned out to be robots once you shot them. Yeah. So, it gives you a little bit more leeway.
It also provided a chance, in a way, to ground the show out of the gate in what became, I think, an incredibly compelling allegory that if you're a kid, I don't care, but I'm not going to watch it for that. But as you get older and you watch it, you realize that the mutants are being persecuted, and the Sentinels are the means of their persecution, and by the people who are scared of them. And it becomes this whole rich story scheme there.
They become a walking metaphor for people's fear of mutants.
If you started with any of the other villains, it would have been more, it's mutant versus mutant, and we're going to have a big fight this week. But that wasn't what it was.
We wanted the human mutant tension to be at the center of the show, because there's all sorts of different ways that they've attacked it in the books. We picked that way because we thought it would be best for the show.
No, that's awesome. That's incredibly insightful, and honestly, this whole conversation has been just phenomenal. So as we wrap up, first off, I want to thank you guys, Eric and Julia, for coming on, for talking about X-Men the Animated Series, for making that, because that's fairly important to, I think, everyone who listens to this show. I haven't heard anyone who said, "Oh no, forget that place." No, people loved the animated series, and it got so many people into X-Men. So thank you guys for that, first off.
Glad to be a part of it, and thank you for remembering it that way.
No, that's great. Now, as we wrap up, you guys are pretty involved online. So where can people find you guys online if they want to know more about the animated series or stuff you guys are doing?
Well, funny you should ask. We are on Twitter at XMenTAS, and that stands for The Animated Series to distinguish it from anything else. So XMenTAS on Twitter, and also XMenTAS.com. We have our own blog there, and our Twitter feed's on that. Eric, when he can, gets a specific blog up there. If you're interested in anything from Larry Houston's Easter eggs all the way back to bits about how some of the cast was chosen, or just our own thoughts and insights, it's available at XMenTAS in blog form.
.com.
.com, sorry, yeah. XMenTAS.com in blog form there.
And the big thing for me now, because I just finished it and I'm just collapsing from the effort, we've got a book coming out and about the making of the show to celebrate the 25th anniversary. And the name of the book is, fans I think appreciate this.
Drum roll, please.
Previously on X-Men is the name of the book.
That's great.
And it's subtitled The Making of an Animated Series. And that kind of hints back to your questions about putting things serially and some of the risks that we're taking. And at first the publisher thought, that's kind of weird. I said, no. That for us, that's like Space, the Final Frontier. That's what you heard the first time, before each episode, at the starting of each episode. So we think the fans will get the book title.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. I think we're both looking forward to reading that when it comes out.
Oh, yeah. I cannot wait.
It should be out. It's supposed to come out in November, and the publisher's name is Jacobs Brown. They do a bunch of do a lot of pop culture books. They're a California publisher, and they've been really good to work with. And they've got a website and a store. It'll be available Amazon, but we're hoping to take it to a bunch of cons and comic book stores and things and events for signings. But
maybe in a neighborhood near you.
Yeah. So we'll with luck we'll get out and about with it. But yeah, starting should be available by mid-November.
That's awesome. We're looking forward to that.
Yep. So as we wrap things up here, if you like the show, you can follow me on Twitter at Xavier Files. That's where we'll put up the show every week. You can also go to my website, XavierFiles.com, where we have new articles about different X-Men every single Thursday. As well, there's some other stuff. Now, Adam, where can people find you online?
As always, guys can find me on Twitter at Arthur Stacy, and I'm just wrapping up Bish and Jube's Age of Strife over at adamrectumblr.com. Who knows? By the time this airs, I may actually be finished the last page, so we'll see what happens. But stop on by.
Right. Now, this podcast and everything that's done by Xavier Files is brought to you by our Patreon, where good folks like you go on to patreon.com/Xavier Files and pledge as little as $1 a month to support everything that happens here. So we really appreciate that. If you can't support the show monetarily, if you want to log on to iTunes or Google Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, leave us a rating and review. It's a really good way to let us know what we need to improve on, how we want to change, and just let other people know that you like it. That about does it for us. Eric and Julia, again, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great experience.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. We had a great time.
Awesome. Well, this has been Battle of the Atom. We hope you survived the experience.
Get it!